There are moments in international relations that are not merely diplomatic incidents. They are not policy disagreements. They are not negotiating tactics. They are ruptures, moments when the accumulated weight of shared sacrifice, mutual trust, and generational partnership is dismissed in a single sentence and can never be fully restored. We are living through such a moment right now. 2 days ago, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, the President of the United States stood before the global elite and launched something called the Board of Peace, a new international body, a rival to the United Nations, permanent seats available for $1 billion. Canada said they'd join in principle. They weren't paying the billion. That same day, Prime Minister Mark Carney delivered a speech. He talked about middle powers standing up to economic coercion. He talked about the collapse of the rules-based order. He explicitly supported Greenland and Denmark's right to determine their own future. Trump was watching. And what happened next was not a policy dispute. It was a public humiliation. Within hours, Trump posted on Truth Social: Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. Then he withdrew Canada's invitation to the Board of Peace. The letter was made public. It said Canada was no longer welcome at what Trump called the most prestigious board of leaders ever assembled at any time. All because they wouldn't write $1 billion check. But that was not the worst of it, because in the same Davos appearance, Trump was asked about NATO. And his answer, casual, dismissive, delivered without apparent awareness of its weight, will be studied for decades as the moment the transatlantic alliance stopped believing. We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. They'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan, and they did. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. 457 British troops died in Afghanistan, 158 Canadians, 90 French, 44 Danish. Not support troops, not rear echelon personnel. Frontline combat forces stationed in Helmand and Kandahar, the Taliban heartland, the most dangerous real estate on Earth. British and Canadian soldiers patrolled the same kill zones where American Marines bled into the same dust. They cleared the same compounds. They stepped on the same IEDs. They came home in the same flag-draped coffins. And the President of the United States just told their families it didn't count. Today, we're not talking about fighter jets or aluminum tariffs or potash exports. We're talking about something far more fundamental, far more personal, and far more permanent. We're talking about the moment an American president publicly rewrote the history of Allied sacrifice, and in doing so, broke something that may never be repaired. This is the story of Davos, the story of the Board of Peace, the Golden Dome, and the $1 billion invitation that Canada refused. But more than that, it is the story of Article 5, the solemn pledge that an attack on one is an attack on all, and what happens when the guarantor of that pledge decides it was never really necessary. Because once you tell your allies their dead don't matter, you cannot unsay it. And once they believe you, they will never fully trust you again. Let's start with the proposal itself because the details matter. The Board of Peace, Trump's alternative to the United Nations, a new global security architecture designed and led by the United States. Permanent seats, $1 billion. Canada's response: will join in principle. We support the concept, but we're not paying $1 billion. This is not unreasonable. Canada is a middle power with a constrained budget. It participates in dozens of international forums without purchasing permanent seats. But Trump did not treat it as reasonable. He treated it as ingratitude. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us. They should be grateful, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. Canada lives because of the United States. Then the letter. Please let this letter serve to represent that the Board of Peace is withdrawing its invitation to you. Not, we regret that Canada has chosen not to participate. Not, we will continue to work together through other channels. Withdrawn, excluded, uninvited. For the crime of refusing to pay $1 billion for a seat at a table that didn't exist 24 hours earlier, this is not diplomacy. This is not negotiation. This is a tantrum. And it would be merely embarrassing. A footnote in the long catalog of Trump-era diplomatic improprieties, if it were not connected to something far more serious. Because the Board of Peace was not the only thing Trump announced at Davos. There was also the Golden Dome. The Golden Dome is Trump's proposed continental missile defense system, named transparently after Israel's Iron Dome, but scaled to cover the entire United States. The estimated cost, $161 billion to $542 billion over 20 years. Congress has already pledged $25 billion a down payment. The concept space-based sensors and interceptors capable of detecting and destroying ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, and cruise missiles at multiple stages of flight, from launch to impact. The problem? Geography. To defend against missiles launched from Russia or China, you need early warning capability in the Arctic. That's the shortest flight path. That's where intercontinental ballistic missiles would come over. That means you need Greenland. Trump has been publicly fixated on acquiring Greenland from Denmark for years. At Davos, he made the connection explicit. We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us. Translation: Canada benefits from American missile defense without paying for it. Canada should be grateful. Canada should support American acquisition of Greenland. And Canada is doing neither. Instead, Prime Minister Carney stood in Davos and explicitly supported Greenland and Denmark's right to determine their own future. Not a neutral position, not a diplomatic hedge. A direct rebuke. And this is where the two threads, the Board of Peace humiliation and the Golden Dome obsession, intersect. Trump sees Canada as a free rider, benefiting from American security guarantees, American missile defense, American continental protection without adequate payment or gratitude. Canada sees itself as a sovereign nation, with its own Arctic territory to defend, its own defense investments to make, its own alliances to manage, and its own relationships to cultivate, including with China, including with Europe, including with the world. These are not compatible views, and they have now collided publicly and catastrophically on the world's most visible stage. But the Board of Peace and the Golden Dome are not what has triggered the current crisis in transatlantic relations. It is what Trump said about Afghanistan. They stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. Let me read you the names and numbers that the President of the United States dismissed as a little back. United Kingdom, 457 dead. Not peacekeepers, not trainers, combat troops. In Helmand Province, the Taliban's spiritual heartland, the site of some of the most intense fighting of the entire war. British forces operated under American command. They cleared villages, they took casualties, they held ground. Canada, 158 dead. Canadians were in Kandahar, the Taliban's birthplace, the most dangerous province in Afghanistan. They fought in Operation Medusa, one of the largest Allied offensives of the war. 27 Canadians died in that single battle. France, 90 dead. Denmark, 44 dead. Per capita, Denmark suffered higher combat losses than the United States. A country of 5.8 million people sent its soldiers to the most dangerous corners of Afghanistan, and 44 of them never came home. A little back, a little off the front lines. The reaction was immediate and devastating. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, frankly, appalling and insulting. Trump should apologize. Germany's defense minister. This is not how allies speak of each other. Prince Harry. A rare public statement from a royal who served 2 tours in Afghanistan. In 2001, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in history. It meant that every allied nation was obliged to stand with the United States in Afghanistan. I served there. I made lifelong friends there. I lost friends there. Diane Durney. Her son Ben Parkinson was severely injured when his Land Rover hit a mine in Afghanistan in 2006. He lost both legs. He suffered catastrophic brain damage. This is the ultimate insult. Not policy criticism, not diplomatic disagreement. The ultimate insult. And here is the detail that should keep every American strategist awake at night. These are not enemies of the United States saying these things. These are allies. These are the countries that invoked Article 5, the only time in NATO's 75-year history that the solemn pledge of collective defense has been activated in response to an attack on American soil. And the American president just told them their sacrifice was a footnote. Now, let's connect this to the strategic reality that nobody in Washington seems willing to acknowledge. Canada's geography is not optional for American defense. If Russia or China launches intercontinental ballistic missiles at the United States, the shortest flight path is over the Canadian Arctic. Not over the Atlantic, not over the Pacific, over Canada. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, exists precisely because the United States cannot defend its northern approaches without Canadian territory, Canadian infrastructure, and Canadian cooperation. This is not a favor Canada does for the United States. This is a mutual dependency. And yet, Trump's rhetoric consistently frames it as Canadian dependence on American generosity. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us. Canada lives because of the United States. The Golden Dome will be defending Canada. This is not just factually wrong. It is strategically dangerous. Because it teaches Canada that its contributions to continental defense are invisible, unappreciated, and valueless in Washington's eyes. And when you teach a partner that their contributions don't matter, they stop contributing. They start investing elsewhere. Canada's $80 billion defense investment over 5 years is not a gift to the United States. It is a recognition that Canada must be able to defend its own territory because the guarantor of its security is no longer reliable. The over-the-horizon radar systems, the Arctic offshore patrol ships, the new fighter fleet, whether F-35 or Gripen, the expanded NORAD modernization funding. These are not American projects. They are Canadian projects, designed for Canadian priorities, operated by Canadian personnel, controlled by Canadian command authorities. And the more the United States frames continental defense as American protection of dependent Canada, the more Canada will invest in capabilities that can operate independently of American support. This is not speculation. This is already happening. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, something else is happening. Multiple European countries have declined to join Trump's Board of Peace. The UK Foreign Secretary, we will not be signatories. France, silent non-participation. Germany, no comment, no commitment. The same countries that invoked Article 5 after 9/11 are now quietly, politely, firmly refusing to participate in an American-led international body. Not because they oppose peace, not because they prefer the UN, because they no longer trust the convener. And here is the detail that should terrify every American diplomat. They are not saying this publicly. They are not issuing press releases denouncing American leadership. They are not calling for Trump's censure. They are not threatening retaliation. They are simply declining invitations, declining commitments, declining the kind of open-ended, trust-based cooperation that has defined transatlantic relations for 75 years. This is not confrontation. This is disengagement. And disengagement is far more difficult to reverse than confrontation, because confrontation implies that engagement is still desired. The parties are just arguing about terms. Disengagement implies that the relationship is no longer worth the effort. Let's return to the Board of Peace, $1 billion. Permanent seat. Canada said no. Britain said no. France said no. Germany said no. Not one major American ally agreed to pay. Think about what that means. The President of the United States proposed a new global security architecture. He set the entry price at $1 billion. He assumed allies would line up to join. None did. This is not because allies lack $1 billion. The UK's defense budget is over $60 billion annually. France's is over $50 billion. Germany's is over $55 billion. They have the money. They chose not to spend it on this because they looked at the Board of Peace and saw not a serious diplomatic initiative, but a vanity project, a mechanism for extracting tribute, not building consensus, a platform for rewarding loyalty, not solving problems, an institution designed to reflect the power of its founder, not the collective interests of its members. And they declined to participate. All of them. This is the context in which Trump's Afghanistan comments must be understood. He is not just insulting the memory of allied dead. He is insulting allies who have already decided, based on ample evidence, that his leadership is not worth following. The comments are not the cause of the estrangement. They are the confirmation. Here is the question that no one in Washington wants to answer. Can this be undone? Can a future administration, Trump's or otherwise, restore the trust that has been lost? The diplomatic optimist would say yes. New leaders, new policies, new commitments. Apologies offered, relationships repaired, history revised. But history is not a blank slate. Every Allied soldier who died in Afghanistan is dead. Their families have heard the President of the United States say their sacrifice was marginal. You cannot unsay that. Every Canadian defense planner who read Trump's "Canada lives because of us" comments has internalized the lesson. Dependence is vulnerability. They are now building alternatives. You cannot uninvent those alternatives. Every European foreign minister who declined the Board of Peace invitation has made a calculation. American leadership is no longer reliable. They are now diversifying their diplomatic portfolios. You cannot unmake that calculation. Trust once broken is not restored by a change of administration. It is restored by years of consistent, predictable, reliable behavior. And years are a long time. Long enough for Canadian ports to expand, for European defense cooperation to deepen, for Asian trade relationships to mature, for Arctic patrol capabilities to become operational. Long enough for the world to reorganize itself around the assumption that the United States is no longer the reliable partner it once was. This is not alarmism. This is path dependency. And the path we are on does not lead back to the status quo ante. finally, we must address the elephant in the room. Trump's repeated casual public references to Canada as a potential 51st state. Most Americans treat this as rhetorical excess, a joke, a negotiating tactic, not to be taken literally. Canadians do not. They hear the President of the United States, repeatedly and without apparent irony, suggest that their country's existence depends on American generosity, and that annexation is a conceivable outcome. This is not a joke to them, it is a threat. Implicit, persistent, and deeply corrosive. Because it forces Canadian policymakers to ask a question they never had to ask before. What happens if the United States actually tries to absorb us? Not through invasion, through economic pressure, through diplomatic coercion, through the slow, relentless application of leverage until sovereignty becomes meaningless. This question was unthinkable 10 years ago. Today, it is discussed in parliamentary committees, defense planning documents, and academic conferences. And the answer to the question is not, it could never happen. The answer is, we must ensure it can never happen. That is what the diversification strategy is really about. Not trade diversification, not energy diversification, not defense diversification, sovereignty diversification. The systematic, deliberate construction of alternatives to American dependence in every sector of national life, so that when the question is asked, what happens if the United States tries to absorb us? The answer is not submission. The answer is resilience. There is a photograph that every Canadian veteran knows. It shows the Afghanistan Memorial in Kandahar province, a simple stone cairn erected by Canadian soldiers in honor of their fallen comrades. The names are inscribed. The dates of death are recorded. 158. 158 Canadians who left their country, crossed an ocean, and fought alongside Americans in the most dangerous place on earth. They did not ask whether the United States would protect Canada in return. They assumed it. They assumed that 75 years of alliance, shared sacrifice, and continental partnership meant something. They assumed that Article 5 was not just a treaty obligation, but a moral commitment. They assumed that the country they fought beside would honor their memory. Those assumptions are now in doubt, not because of one speech, not because of one insult, not because of one diplomatic tantrum, because of the accumulated weight of 5 years of evidence. Evidence that American leadership is transactional, not principled. Evidence that American commitments are conditional, not enduring. Evidence that American gratitude is contingent on payment, and the price is never final. Canada did not want this. Canada did not seek to diversify away from the United States. It did not aspire to build alternatives to American partnership. It did not hope to discover that its closest ally was also its greatest strategic vulnerability. But it has accepted their reality, and that acceptance is now irreversible. Not because Canada is vengeful, not because Canada is anti-American, not because Canada has abandoned the alliance, because Canada has learned the lesson that the United States spent 5 years teaching. Dependence is vulnerability. Trust is not automatic, and the only reliable guarantee of sovereignty is the capacity to defend it yourself. The Board of Peace will meet without Canada. The Golden Dome will protect American territory with or without Canadian participation, and the 158 Canadians who died in Afghanistan will remain dead. Their sacrifice dismissed by a president who never understood what they died for. But their country remembers, and it is building quietly, methodically, permanently, a future in which no American president can ever again say, Canada lives because of the United States. Because Canada will live because of Canada. What do you think? Can the transatlantic alliance survive a president who publicly dismisses Allied sacrifice? Is Canada's diversification strategy a necessary hedge against American unpredictability or an overreaction to rhetorical excess? And what would it take to restore the trust that has been lost? Let me know in the comments. If you want to track these geopolitical and alliance shifts before they become headlines, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We're watching the signals the rest of the world misses.